It is the morning of November 23, 1910. At 9 o'clock, at Pentonville Prison in North London, a grim Victorian institution a mile from the house at the center of this entire story, a 47-year-old American doctor named Hawley Harvey Crippen is led to the gallows and hanged. He goes to his death quietly. He has maintained his innocence throughout his trial, throughout every appeal, throughout every petition. In one of his final letters, written from his cell to the woman he loves, he writes, "Face to face with God, I believe that facts will be forthcoming to prove my innocence." The gallows do not wait for facts. Crippen is buried in the prison grounds. The case is closed. And for the better part of a century, it stays that way, a textbook example of Edwardian justice, one of the most famous murder cases in British history, the story of a meek little doctor who poisoned his domineering wife, dismembered her body, buried the remains under the cellar floor, and then tried to run. Except, in 2007, 97 years after Crippen's execution, a forensic scientist at Michigan State University in the United States ran DNA tests on tissue from the original prosecution evidence. Tissue from the body that had been found in the cellar at 39 Hilldrop Crescent. Tissue that had been used to convict Crippen and send him to the gallows. The scientist's name is Professor David Foran. And what he found shook the case to its foundations. The DNA in the tissue sample did not match the DNA of Cora Crippen's living relatives. Not only that. When Foran's team ran tests for biological sex, they found something that nobody in 1910 had known or been equipped to discover. The remains in Crippen's cellar were not female. They were male. As the story unfolds, here 3 questions to ponder about. 1. Did Hawley Harvey Crippen murder his wife, or did Britain execute an innocent man for a body that was never hers? 2. How did the first great trial of the modern forensic era rest on evidence that a century later would be shown to be deeply, possibly catastrophically, wrong? 3. And what, if the body in the cellar was not Cora Crippen? Before we go any further, if this kind of storytelling is what you have been looking for, the subscribe button is just below this video. We cover true crime from around the world, told with the detail and care it deserves. No sensationalism. No rushing through the facts. Just the full story, properly told. Hit subscribe, and you won't miss the next one. To understand what happened at Hilldrop Crescent, we have to go back. To an Edwardian household in North London. To a marriage that was making both people in it miserable. And to a night in January 1910 when Cora Crippen walked out of a dinner party and was never seen again. Edwardian London, the world Crippen inhabited. London in 1900 is a city in the middle of a transformation it cannot quite see yet. The Victorian era has just ended. King Edward VII is on the throne. The city is still lit partly by gas, still served by horse-drawn vehicles on many of its streets. But electricity is spreading. The motor car is appearing. And on the wireless telegraphy masts that are beginning to dot the coastline, a new kind of communication is being tested, signals sent without wires, carried on invisible waves across distances that would have seemed impossible a decade before. This technology will, in 1910, catch a murderer. Or a man accused of being one. Holloway, where the Crippens live, at 39 Hilldrop Crescent, is a residential neighborhood in North London. In 1910 it was solidly lower middle class, rows of terraced and semi-detached Victorian houses, each projecting a careful respectability. The inhabitants are clerks, small tradesmen, the sort of people who keep up appearances. The Crippens keep up appearances too. But the reality of their household is quite different from what the neighbors see. Hawley Harvey Crippen, the quiet American. Hawley Harvey Crippen was born in 1862 in Coldwater, Michigan, a small town in the American Midwest. He qualified from the Cleveland Homeopathic Medical College in 1884. He is, by every account, a quiet man. A gentle man. Small, mild-mannered, slightly built, with thick-lensed spectacles that make his eyes look slightly too large for his face. He is known to his friends as Peter. He works hard. He is not the type of man you would look at in the street and think, there goes a monster. His medical qualifications from the United States are not recognized in Britain, meaning that when he moved to London in 1897 to manage Mugnon's patent medicine office, he could not practice as a physician. The gap between what he appears to be and what he legally is in England is one of several small deceptions that will be held against him when this story turns dark. Cora Crippen, Belle Elmore. Cora Crippen was born Kunigunde Makomotski in Brooklyn, New York, to Polish-German parents. She is 11 years younger than Crippen and his temperamental opposite in almost every way. Where Crippen is quiet, Cora is loud. She has ambitions for the stage. She wants to be an opera singer, or failing that, a music hall performer. She is warm, funny, sociable, and fond of entertaining. She collects friends in quantity and with enthusiasm. She has also, for most of their marriage, been conducting an affair. Her primary long-term relationship is with Bruce Miller, a vaudeville performer from Chicago, who she has been involved with since 1897. Cora and Hawley are, by 1908 or so, living almost entirely separate domestic lives under the same roof. Cora has one significant medical fact in her history. She has had an ovariectomy, surgery to remove one or both ovaries, which has left a visible scar on her lower abdomen. That scar will become the most important piece of forensic evidence in this entire case. And it will, a century later, become the most contested. The household at Hilldrop Crescent, 1905 to 1910. The Crippens moved into 39 Hilldrop Crescent in September 1905. It is a rented house, comfortable, reasonably sized, with a coal cellar beneath the kitchen floor. Crippen, meanwhile, has been developing a relationship with a young woman named Ethel Leneve. Ethel works as his secretary. By 1906 or 1907 the relationship had become intimate. Cora knows about it. The marriage has reached a state of mutual toleration that neither party has the energy to resolve formally. On the evening of January 31, 1910, the Crippens hosted a small dinner party. Their guests are Paul and Clara Martinetti, music hall performers, friends of Cora's. The evening apparently passes pleasantly. The Martinettis leave at around 1:30 in the morning. Cora Crippen is never seen again. The disappearance. In the days that follow the dinner party, Crippen begins to tell people that Cora has gone to America. The story changes several times, visiting family, then a sick relative, then seriously ill. Then, in March, he tells Cora's friends in the Music Hall Ladies Guild that she has died. Died in California. Cremated. No remains to return. Cora's friends are suspicious almost immediately. They know Cora is not the sort of person who simply disappears. They notice that Ethel Leneve has moved into Hilldrop Crescent. They notice she is wearing some of Cora's jewelry and furs. The contrast between the story Crippen is telling and the visible domestic reality is too sharp to ignore. Cora's friend Lil Hawthorne makes inquiries through her contacts at Scotland Yard. The inquiries reach Chief Inspector Walter Dew. The first investigation, nothing found. Chief Inspector Walter Dew visited 39 Hilldrop Crescent on July 8, 1910. Dew is an experienced detective. As a younger man he had worked on the Jack the Ripper case. He interviews Crippen, who is cooperative and apparently calm. Crippen admits the story about Cora dying in California was a lie. He made it up, he says, because he was embarrassed. Cora had left him. She had gone to America with another man. He had invented the death story to save face. Dew accepts this provisionally. He searches the house. He finds nothing suspicious. He leaves. This is the moment that changes everything, not because of what Dew found, but because of what Crippen does next. Crippen panics. He and Ethel Leneve flee the country. They travel to Brussels, then to Antwerp, where they board the SS Montrose, bound for Quebec. Ethel is dressed as a boy. She is traveling as Crippen's son. When Dew returns a few days later and finds Crippen gone, he orders a thorough search of the property. The discovery in the cellar. The fourth and final search of 39 Hilldrop Crescent took place on July 13, 1910. In the coal cellar beneath the kitchen, detectives find loose brickwork. They dig. Under the bricks and a layer of earth, they find human remains. Not a skeleton. Not a complete body. What they find is a mass of soft tissue, flesh, organs, some hair in curlers, wrapped in a pajama jacket. The head is absent. The limbs are absent. The skeleton is largely absent. What they have found has been deliberately reduced to something nearly unidentifiable. The prosecution's own pathologists, including Bernard Spilsbury, acknowledge in court that they cannot determine whether the tissue is from a male or a female from physical appearance alone. This is not a minor point. It is one of the central, documented facts of this case. The prosecution cannot determine sex. And yet they will convict a man for murdering his wife on the basis of these remains. The three pillars of the prosecution's case. The prosecution at Crippen's trial rests on three pieces of evidence. The first is the hyoscine. William Wilcox, the Home Office's senior scientific analyst, finds traces of hyoscine hydrobromide, also known as scopolamine, a sedative that in sufficient doses can cause death, in the remains. Crippen purchased hyoscine from a chemist in January 1910, signing the poison register as the law required, and cannot provide a convincing explanation for what he did with it. The second is the pajama jacket. It matches trousers found in Crippen's bedroom. The manufacturer, Jones Brothers, testifies this style had only been available since after the Crippens moved into Hilldrop Crescent, ruling out the defense's claim that the remains were left by a previous occupant. The third is the scar. Bernard Spilsbury, a 23-year-old pathologist at the beginning of what will become a legendary career, examines the piece of skin from the abdominal area of the remains. He says it bears a scar consistent with Cora's ovariectomy. He says, on the stand, "As regards the scar, I have absolutely no doubt." The jury is out for 27 minutes. They return a verdict of guilty. Crippen is hanged. The wireless telegraph chase, the world changes. When Crippen and Ethel Leneve board the SS Montrose at Antwerp on July 20, 1910, they are traveling as Mr. Robinson and his son John. The disguise is imperfect from the beginning. Ethel's manner is undeniably feminine. Captain Henry George Kendall has seen the wanted posters. And as Montrose makes its way into the Atlantic, he becomes increasingly certain. On July 22, just within range of his wireless transmitter, Kendall has his telegraphist send a message to shore, "Have strong suspicions that Crippen London's cellar murderer and accomplice are among saloon passengers. Mustache taken off, growing beard. Accomplice dressed as a boy. Manner and build undoubtedly a girl." This is the first time in history that wireless telegraphy, radio, in its earliest form, is used to pursue a criminal suspect. Inspector Dew boards a faster liner, the SS Laurentic, from Liverpool. It crosses the Atlantic ahead of Montrose. Dew disguises himself as a river pilot to board the Montrose as it approaches the St. Lawrence estuary. He steps forward. Removes his hat. Crippen looks at him and says, "Thank God it's over. The suspense has been too great. I couldn't stand it any longer." Whether those words came from guilt, or from the exhaustion of a frightened and hunted man, the century since has never fully resolved. The trial at the Old Bailey, October 1910. Crippen and Leneve are brought back to England on the SS Megantic, arriving at Liverpool on August 27. The press coverage is extraordinary. The trial opened at the Old Bailey on October 18, 1910, before the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Alverstone. It lasts 5 days. Crippen maintains throughout that Cora left him. His defense team argues that the remains might predate the Crippen's tenancy. The pajama jacket evidence makes this difficult. So does the hyoscine purchase. But the forensic case, the identification of the remains as Cora, rests almost entirely on Spilsbury and his scar. The first reversal, the flight that convicted him. Crippen, almost certainly, would not have been convicted if he had not fled. When Inspector Dew first visited and Crippen explained that Cora had left him, Dew went away provisionally satisfied. He found nothing in the first search. He had no body, no physical evidence, no grounds for arrest. Crippen's flight, the moment he took Ethel to Brussels instead of answering more questions, is what triggered the thorough search that found what was under the cellar floor. His own words on the Montrose dock, "Thank God it's over. The suspense has been too great," are consistent with either a guilty man whose anxiety collapsed, or an innocent man who knew that circumstance had made him look guilty beyond salvation. The second reversal, what the defense said about the scar. The defense's position on the scar is anatomically coherent and was never adequately answered. Scar tissue is specialized fibrous tissue that replaces normal skin architecture, including sebaceous glands and hair follicles, with collagen fibers. It does not contain active glands. It cannot. The defense expert said, "What you are looking at is a skin fold, not a scar." Spilsbury said, "It is a scar, and I have no doubt." The jury had to choose between certainty and accuracy. They chose certainty. Whether this was the right choice, whether Spilsbury was right and the defense was wrong, is a question that, as forensic historians note, experts cannot agree on even today. The original tissue no longer exists in a state that allows definitive examination. What Spilsbury identified as a scar contained sebaceous glands. At this point in the story, before the DNA, before 2007, I want to ask you directly. You have heard the case. The missing wife. The body under the floor. The poison purchase. The flight across the ocean. Do you think Crippen did it? Drop your answer in the comments now. Because what comes next is going to force you to reconsider everything. The third reversal, the DNA that changed everything. In October 2007, Professor David Foran, director of the Forensic Science Program at Michigan State University, published the results of a DNA analysis conducted on tissue from Bernard Spilsbury's original histological slide, preserved at the Royal London Hospital archives for nearly a century. Foran's laboratory obtains DNA samples from 3 living maternal relatives of Cora Crippen, great-nieces, located through genealogical research. Their mitochondrial DNA should closely match Cora's. He compares these samples to the mitochondrial DNA extracted from the slide. The samples do not match. This can't be Cora Crippen, Foran tells Science Daily. We're certain of that. The team then runs a second set of tests, targeting Y chromosome genetic markers to determine biological sex. The Y chromosome markers are present. The remains in the cellar at Hilldrop Crescent are male. Crippen was hanged for murdering a woman. The body in his cellar was a man. The challenge to Foran's results. Foran's results have been challenged, and I want to be fair to both sides. Critics note, a single, century-old sample. Chain of custody that cannot be verified with absolute certainty over 100 years. The alleged relatives of Cora, identified through genealogical research, may not be her direct maternal descendants, meaning the comparison sample itself could be wrong. Foran's response, the DNA work was more extensive than what any single public account portrays, and the male finding is unequivocal. The UK's Criminal Cases Review Commission reviewed the case in 2009 and declined to refer it to the Court of Appeal. Their determination, the DNA findings were not sufficient to overturn the conviction under the legal threshold for referral. We are left in an uncomfortable place. Not one that says Crippen was innocent. Not one that says he was guilty. One that says the primary evidence used to convict him has been seriously and credibly challenged, and the challenge has not been definitively refuted. Who was Crippen, really? The image of Crippen fixed in public memory in 1910 was the image the press needed, a cold, calculating, mild-mannered monster caught only by the miracle of wireless telegraphy. Madame Tussauds put him in the chamber of horrors alongside history's great villains. The record is more complicated. Everyone who knew Crippen described him as gentle, conscientious, devoted to Ethel Leneve. His letters from prison are not the letters of a monster, they are the letters of a man who loves a woman and is preparing to die. He does not express regret about Cora. He expresses grief at leaving Ethel. Forensic toxicologist John Tracetrail has argued for decades that Crippen's behavior is internally inconsistent with guilt. A calculating poisoner uses poison precisely because it mimics natural death. You do not then mutilate and bury the body, which creates exactly the gruesome, suspicious evidence trail that gets you hanged. If Crippen poisoned Cora and then dismembered her, he combined the subtlety of a poisoner with the recklessness of someone who had entirely lost their mind. This is possible. But it is not consistent with everything else the record tells us about him. The Spilsbury effect, when expert certainty becomes dangerous. The Crippen case launched the career of Bernard Spilsbury, and through Spilsbury's career, it shaped British forensic pathology for the next 4 decades. Spilsbury became the most celebrated and feared expert witness in Britain. He appeared in hundreds of murder cases. He was knighted. His conclusions were treated by juries as effectively conclusive. The posthumous reassessment of Spilsbury has been severe. A 2007 book by Andrew Rose, a former barrister-turned-judge, examined Spilsbury's career and concluded he had a consistent, documented tendency to state conclusions beyond what the evidence could sustain. That he shaped his testimony toward the prosecution. That the absolute certainty he projected, I have no doubt, was a performance of confidence, not always a reflection of scientific rigor. The Crippen case is not the only one where Spilsbury's testimony has been questioned. But it is the first. And it is the one where a man was executed. The lesson the forensic community has drawn, and it has taken decades to absorb, is that the appearance of expert certainty is not the same as scientific truth. That a jury hears I have no doubt and stops asking questions. And that this can be lethal. Ethel Leneve, the woman who walked away. Ethel Leneve is acquitted at a separate trial. She leaves London on the morning of Crippen's execution and travels to the United States, where she lives for some years before returning to England, marrying a man named Stanley Smith, and spending the rest of her life in deliberate obscurity. She never speaks publicly about the case. She died in 1967 at the age of 84. In a deathbed interview, details of which emerged after her death, she apparently maintained that Crippen was innocent. That she had always believed he did not kill Cora. That Cora, in her belief, was alive somewhere. Where is Cora Crippen? If the body in the cellar was not Cora's, where is she? One possibility, Cora left. She had reason to. The marriage was over. She had another man in Bruce Miller. She had spent years conducting her social life entirely independently of her husband. She could have simply disappeared, started over in America, under a different name. There is some evidentiary support for this theory. A decade after Cora's disappearance, reports emerged of a woman calling herself Belle Elmore, Cora's stage name, living in America with Cora's sister. These reports were not investigated seriously at the time. They were easier to ignore once Crippen was convicted and hanged. If Cora was alive when Crippen went to the gallows, the question of why she did not come forward is both obvious and complicated. The case had attracted unprecedented publicity on both sides of the Atlantic. Suddenly appearing alive and well would have been explosive, and implicated her in her husband's death, at minimum by her silence. There are also reports, disputed, but documented, of letters written to the then Home Secretary, a 35-year-old Winston Churchill, purporting to be from Cora. These letters were dismissed at the time as hoaxes. Crippen was already dead. What the case changed, forever. Whatever the truth of what happened at 39 Hilldrop Crescent, the Crippen case changed criminal justice in ways that are still with us. The wireless telegraph chase is the obvious legacy, the first time radio communication was used to pursue and capture a suspect. Every police radio, every electronic surveillance system, every real-time data network used in criminal investigation today is, in a very real sense, downstream of the message Captain Kendall sent from the Montrose. The media dimension is also foundational. The Crippen chase was the first criminal case in which the public followed events in real time through daily newspaper updates. The relationship between crime investigation and mass media that we take for granted was, in its current form, born in the summer of 1910. The forensic legacy is more complicated. The Crippen case gave Spilsbury his platform, and Spilsbury gave British courts the template for the expert forensic witness, a figure whose authority was so substantial that juries deferred to it without critical examination. That model has, in the century since, been systematically dismantled. Modern forensic practice requires independent expert review, requires disclosure of the limits of conclusions, and requires defense access to the same testing opportunities. The Crippen case, and Spilsbury's career, is cited regularly in discussions about why those safeguards matter. The photograph taken of Crippen in the dock at the Old Bailey also produced an immediate consequence. Parliament passed legislation prohibiting photography in British courtrooms. That law, in modified form, continues to the present day. 2009, the CCRC decision. In December 2009, Crippen's relatives submitted a formal request to the Criminal Cases Review Commission asking for a posthumous pardon and referral to the Court of Appeal. The commission declined. Their assessment: the DNA evidence, while scientifically significant, was not sufficient to establish that the conviction was unsafe beyond the legal threshold required for referral. Chain of custody concerns. Sample integrity questions. What the CCRC decision does not do is resolve the underlying question. It says only that the existing evidence does not meet the legal threshold for reopening the case. It does not say Crippen was guilty. It says the system has not been given enough to act. The letter he never sent. Before Crippen was executed, he wrote a letter addressed to Ethel. In it, he says, "Face to face with God, I believe that facts will be forthcoming to prove my innocence." He was right that facts would come. He was wrong that they would come in time. The DNA findings arrived 97 years after the gallows. Whether they are the proof of innocence he anticipated remains contested. But they are, at minimum, proof that the case is not what it appeared to be in 1910. That the body in the cellar was not Cora's. That the primary identification evidence used to convict him was wrong. What remains? Hawley Harvey Crippen was convicted of murdering his wife. The jury was sure in 27 minutes. The evidence, in 1910, felt overwhelming. And in some ways it was overwhelming, because the forensic science of 1910 was not equipped to ask the right questions. It could find a scar on a piece of skin. It could not determine sex. It could not extract DNA. It did what it could, and it was enough for a jury. But the forensic science of 2007 can ask those questions. And when it asked them, the answers were not what 1910 assumed. The body was not Cora's. The body was male. The scar described with absolute certainty may have been a fold of skin. The expert who said "I have no doubt" had a career-long pattern of overstating his conclusions. And the man who was hanged wrote from his cell that facts would one day come. Does all of this mean Crippen was innocent? I cannot tell you that. Nobody can, now. Crippen is dead. Cora, wherever she is, whatever happened to her, is dead. The original tissue is degraded beyond recovery. The witnesses are gone. What I can tell you is that the Crippen case is not the textbook certainty that a century of retelling has made it. It is, at its core, a case about the limits of forensic confidence, about what happens when an expert says "I have no doubt" and a jury believes him, and the science that would have asked better questions had not yet been invented. The cellar at Hilldrop Crescent was filled in long ago. The house is gone, destroyed in the Blitz in 1942. The site is a block of flats now, ordinary and unremarkable. But the question that Crippen wrote from his cell is still being asked. And the facts, when they came, did not provide the closure anyone expected. They just opened a different room. There are men who go to the gallows insisting on their innocence. Most of them are guilty. Hawley Harvey Crippen may not have been. He was a quiet man. Everyone who knew him said so. Small, mild-mannered, devoted to his work and to the woman he loved. Not the kind of man you would look at in the street and think, "There goes a monster." Not the kind of man history usually makes into one. And yet history made him into one anyway. He was convicted in 27 minutes. Hanged on a November morning in 1910. Buried in the prison grounds. And for nearly a century, the case was considered closed, a textbook example of Edwardian justice, a meek little doctor who poisoned his wife and paid the price. Then the DNA came. 97 years after the gallows, a forensic scientist ran tests on the tissue that had convicted him. The remains in the cellar did not match his wife's DNA. They were not even female. Crippen wrote from his death cell, "I believe facts will be forthcoming to prove my innocence." He was right. They came. A century too late. Whether he was guilty, we cannot say with certainty now. The original evidence cannot be recovered. The witnesses are gone. The trail is cold. What we can say is this: the evidence that sent him to the gallows was wrong. The expert who said "I have no doubt" had a career-long pattern of saying so when doubt was warranted. The body in the cellar was not his wife. And the man who stood on the dock of the SS Montrose and said, "Thank God it's over, the suspense has been too great," that man may have been innocent, and exhausted, and frightened, and out of options. He asked to be buried with the photograph of the woman he loved. That request was granted. Whatever the truth of what happened at Hilldrop Crescent, and we may never know it, Hawley Harvey Crippen deserved a justice system capable of asking better questions than 1910 knew how to ask. He did not get one. The cellar is gone. The house is gone. The body was never identified. But the question Crippen wrote from his cell is still being asked. And that, perhaps, is the only justice available to him now.